Hello folks and welcome back to the channel, and happy America 250. So, I figured, what better way to celebrate the United States of America's 250th birthday than to do a history video on the train built to celebrate America's 200th birthday that ran between 1975 and 1976. And yes, it ran in 1975 and 1976 because it was kind of hard to hit all 48 states in 365 days with steam trains. That was kind of a logistics nightmare, so they just did it in 2 years, which was just as cool. But the American Freedom Train was built to quite literally just celebrate the United States of America's 200th anniversary. But it didn't just happen in 1976. The first American Freedom Train was actually run between 1947 and 1949, shortly after World War II. The train was proposed in 1946 by Attorney General Tom C. Clark, who believed that Americans had been taking the freedoms that are not free for granted. So the train was simply there to serve as a reminder of what we have and what's so special about our great country. The train would be loaded with various historical documents that would be read to the public on different days whenever the train was in town in the different states. And the train would serve as a reminder to remind the American people why our country is so great and what made it so great. Another very interesting thing to note is that the American Freedom Train of 1947 and 1949 is the only American Freedom Train that could say that it ran through all of the United States. And that's because it wasn't until 1959 when Alaska and Hawaii joined the Union. Which means that in 1975 and 1976, that American Freedom Train did not technically run through all of the United States because it couldn't reach Hawaii or Alaska. But still nonetheless pretty cool. So that's just kind of an interesting extra fact. But yeah, so the American Freedom Train 1947 and 1949 essentially just ran around the country promoting what America's all about, reminding people that freedom is not free, and simply boosting the spirits of the United States, especially since they found that in the post-war era, people were taking their freedoms a little bit for granted. So they thought it was a good reminder to send a train, because back in the day, trains were everything. They knew people would come out to see the train, and they knew that that'd be a perfect way to remind people of what America's all about. In the early 1970s, Ross Rowland Jr., a successful commodities broker in New York and occasionally a steam locomotive engineer, was playing around with the idea of a train that would celebrate America's 200th birthday. Ross Rowland had several friends at Steamtown, USA, who helped put together the Golden Spike Centennial Train of 1969 that was pulled by the Nickel Plate Road 759 Berkshire. They knew that for this train to work, it had to be pulled by a steam train because it was a proven people magnet. They knew if the steam train rolled through town, people would pull out their cameras. And that was a really good thing for a train intended to attract people's attention. So, they knew it had to be pulled by a steam train. However, unfortunately, by the time they had 5 corporate sponsors to sponsor the train, they barely had any time left to get a steam train put together. The project almost didn't happen, because by the time they had signed on, there was barely time to find a suitable steam engine for restoration or put together the train itself that the steam locomotive was to pull. But remember, these aren't just any old individuals we're talking about. These are Americans, and if there's one thing that they can accomplish is the impossible, which meant that putting together a full 26-car long train with a steam engine was no problem, and by April of 1975, the American Freedom Train was ready to rock and roll. Like I said earlier, the train had to be pulled by a steam train, which meant that the first locomotives that they purchased was the Reading Company's T1 Northern 2101. However, they didn't just buy 2101, they also bought 2100 to be their parts engine, so that they could keep 2101 running. But eventually they found that they wanted a third steam engine, even though it was the only second steam engine they ran, was Southern Pacific 4449, which pulled most of the western trip of the train. However, it did rack up the most miles of all three locomotives used. And the third locomotive used was Texas Pacific number 610, which would pull the train through Texas. The train itself consisted of 26 cars, 10 of which were former New York Central and Penn Central baggage cars that were converted into display cars. These were the exhibit cars and were numbered 101 through 110, and they carry more than 500 treasures of Americana, including George Washington's copy of the Constitution, the original Louisiana Purchase, Judy Garland's dress from The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, replicas of Jesse Owens' Olympic gold medals from 1936, one of which was stolen along the way, and, not to mention, a rock from the moon. The train also consisted of two showcase cars that were converted from New York Central and Penn Central baggage cars number 41 and 40. They had large showcase windows on either side through which exhibits could be seen at both day and night. They carried a model of the Baltimore and Ohio Arabian, a steam locomotive, and the Friendship fire engine from Washington's Fire Company, a 1904 Oldsmobile runabout, a replica of the Apollo lunar rover, a map of the train's journey, and the Freedom Bell. The rest of the cars were crew dormitories, a tool car, security car, power generator car, and a flatbed car that was used to carry the Freedom Bell. On March 28, 1975, it was time to get this show on the road. The departure of the entire train behind locomotive number 1, following a short ribbon-cutting ceremony, left from Cameron Station, Virginia. But now it was time for the train to make its first stop. Its first stop would be at Wilmington, Delaware, where on the opening day it had free admission, courtesy of the DuPont Corp. Governor Sherman W. Tibbett attended, and the train was displayed at Delaware Park. Also, while in Delaware, the locomotive made a stop at Penn Central Station, Penn Central Wilmington shops, where locomotive number 1 would have a side rod replaced. Another fun fact, though not at Delaware, my dad actually got to see the American Freedom Train back in 1976. So, pretty neat, kind of cool. He can still remember they got this hat and whatnot, some pins and stuff. Admission was most of the time free for the American Freedom Train, or at least that's the way it was intended. But at some places they charged up to $2 for an adult and $1 for kids. But even then, it was pretty big bang for your buck, I guess. So, it wasn't a bad deal. But yeah, the American Freedom Train is something that many people can remember, and I really wish they would have done one this year, but unfortunately they did not. So I guess it's never too late. Maybe, even if it's a couple years late, the American Freedom Train might be kind of cool. But anyway, folks, that's about all I'm going to put in for the schedule, because the schedule for this train was huge, and it took 2 years, and I don't think you guys had the attention span to listen to me tell you every state that the train went to in order. So I'm gonna put a map up on the screen, and then we'll talk about the last stop. So I decided, what's better than one map when you could have two maps? So the one that I have with all the American Freedom Train, that's all the cool stuff. That was actually the map that was inside the coach. But then the map I have in the lower right, that's got the yellow, black, and blue lines on it, that's actually the map displaying which trains pulled which part of the journey. So as you can see, the yellow line is actually the Southern Pacific Daylight 4449's trip. It pulled all those states. And then you see the blue line is where Texas Pacific number 610 pulled the train through Texas. And then you see all the upper East Coast stuff where you got the Reading and the Reading Railroad. I want to say Reading and Northern. But no, the Reading 2101 that pulled the American Freedom Train through the East Coast. Now, this is not a perfect map. The train did go to some different places, and it was kind of a spaghetti thing. But this is the general idea. And now here you can see the map that was featured inside the American Freedom Train that showed where the train had been and where it was going and whatnot. So if you want to pause the video and look at all that, I'm not sure how clear this will pop up, but you can take a minute to look at it if you like. Like all good things, the American Freedom Train had to come to an end. By December 31st, the train had made its final stop in Miami, Florida. Miami, Florida was its 138th stop on the trip. It had traveled 25,833 miles, and that was displayed on an official plaque out front of the locomotive as a milepost. The train had over 7 million people pass through it, and after the very last visitor, Ross Rowland was the one to lock up the door and declare that the American Freedom Train has officially closed. That night, the staff threw a grand party to see off the new year, and then the next morning they took off and went their separate ways. And the American Freedom Train would be deconstructed and repainted to their original colors, and that was the end of the American Freedom Train. Of course, the train did make a couple of trips in 1977, but most of them were just to simply stage the trains for pictures and, start getting things torn down, some final excursions to see the train in the original Freedom Train colors. But by early 1977, everything had been put back to normal and the American Freedom Train had been torn apart. But that was the way it was intended. When the American Freedom Train first rolled off as an idea, it was basically a 2-year celebration. It was only a 2-year celebration because, well, you can't run a train that can run through all 48 continental states in a year. So it took 2 years, but if I do say so myself, it was a pretty cool thing that they managed to accomplish, especially given the odds and the statistic nightmare that this had to have been to figure out, and they managed to make it all happen. And at the end of the day, it was absolutely incredible. I wish I could have seen it. It's really one of those things. Maybe later on we'll make some more in-depth videos talking more in deep about the schedule and how the locomotives came to be, but I feel like this was a pretty good way to celebrate Independence Day. And with that, I got one more thing to say. The American Freedom Train wasn't about cool steam locomotives that traveled the country or anything like that. It was really about celebrating our country. Yes, it was celebrating our country in a cool way that all of us train people loved, but it was really about celebrating our country in our own little way. The American Freedom Train simply went on tour to remember our forefathers who fought for our great country, some of them who lost their lives to earn our freedoms. And that's why we should remember that freedom's never free, and nor will it ever be. And if it wasn't for our great country and our forefathers that fought for it, we would not have what we have today. And we should all remember that this Independence Day. You see, Independence Day is not necessarily the day our country was founded, but it is the day that the idea of our country was founded. Also known as the greatest experiment ever conducted. Now, because of this grand experiment, we earned our freedoms. And therefore, people like Ross Rowland were able to use those freedoms that we all enjoy to do something truly spectacular. He started the American Freedom Train. And the American Freedom Train was something, like I said earlier, just to celebrate the country. But it went down in many people's memories as one of the coolest things they ever saw. My dad still talks about it to this day, and I'm sure many other people that got to see the train also still talk about it. And that's what makes history so cool. History is not just about remembering all the good things, it's also about remembering the bad things. Because not every history is perfect, but we have to remember the bad things that happened in history in order to avoid those bad things in the future. It helps us remember what went wrong and helps us ensure that we don't repeat those bad things later on down the road and try to do all the good things that we did in the past and try to repeat them. See, history repeats itself, which is why I'm hoping that we'll have an American Freedom Train here, maybe soon. But history has a tendency to repeat itself, and if we don't learn from our mistakes in the past, we will repeat them. And that's why it's good to learn about history and know as much as you can know. Like I said, I don't remember who told me this, but I'm sure somebody told me this years and years ago. There's no shame in not knowing, but there is shame in not learning. Now, with all that said, I hope you all have a wonderful Independence Day, and I also hope that y'all celebrate your Independence Day the way John Adams said you should. See, even though John Adams said that Independence Day was supposed to be July 2nd, he did say that Independence Day would be celebrated with a lot of things that involve gunpowder. And I think we've done a pretty good job at that up to now, so let's not stop that tradition yet. So, I hope you all enjoy your Independence Day. Please share this video with your friends and family, and as always folks, see you on the rails.